What if the thing that was supposed to make you feel safe was actually the thing slowly taking your freedom away? Not a lock on the door, not a raised voice, just a small blue dot on a map, quietly watching everywhere you go. This is the story of a woman who agreed to something that felt small at the time, sharing her location with her boyfriend, just so he'd feel more secure. It seemed harmless. It even felt sweet at first, but over 2 years, that small blue dot slowly turned into something else entirely, a leash disguised as love. And the moment she finally understood what it had really become wasn't during a fight. It was in a hospital hallway, exhausted, holding her phone, staring at 14 unread messages, while her mother was somewhere behind her recovering from a procedure. This is a real story shared on Reddit, and it touches something a lot of couples do without ever questioning it. By the end of this video, you might find yourself looking at your own phone a little differently. Let's go through it from the beginning. Location sharing has become such a normalized part of modern relationships that most people never pause to examine what it's actually doing to the way they move through their own day. It gets framed almost universally as a safety feature, a small act of care, something couples do simply because the technology exists and makes it easy. Rarely does anyone stop to ask what happens when that convenience quietly shifts from being optional to being expected, from being mutual to being one-sided, from being about safety to being about control. Rachel's story walks through exactly that transformation, one small step at a time. The woman telling this story is 26 years old. We'll call her Rachel, name changed for privacy. She was with her boyfriend, who we'll call Tyler, 28 years old, for a little over 2 years. Rachel says location sharing started small, the way most toxic patterns do, quietly and reasonably, long before anyone involved would have called it anything close to toxic. About 4 months into the relationship, Tyler asked her to turn it on. He explained that it would make him feel closer to her, more secure, especially since his last relationship had ended because his ex had cheated on him, a wound that clearly still shaped how he moved through this new relationship. Rachel felt for him deeply. She had nothing to hide, so agreeing felt easy, even generous. She turned hers on too, and turned his location sharing on for herself as well, thinking of it as something mutual, something fair, something two people who trusted each other would naturally do for one another. And at first, it really was just that simple. Tyler would text things like, "Have fun at your sister's," when he noticed she was there. It felt sweet. It felt like being thought of, like being known. There's something worth naming here, because it's exactly what makes patterns like this so difficult to recognize in the moment. In the earliest stage, this kind of attention genuinely can feel like intimacy. Being noticed, being thought of throughout an ordinary day, can feel warm rather than invasive, especially in a new relationship where both people are still learning each other's rhythms. The danger isn't in that early warmth itself. The danger is in how easily that warmth can later be used to justify behavior that no longer resembles warmth at all, simply because it once did. But slowly, almost invisibly, it started to change. If Rachel stopped somewhere that wasn't part of her usual route home, she'd get a text within minutes. Not angry, not accusatory, exactly, just checking. Everything okay? Where are you at? And here's the detail that reveals just how deep this pattern had already taken root. Rachel started explaining herself before Tyler even asked. She didn't fully notice she was doing it until her best friend pointed it out over lunch one day. Mid-conversation, completely unprompted, Rachel had texted Tyler, "Just stopped for coffee. Be home in 20. Like a reflex. Like breathing. Without even registering she'd done it. That detail is worth sitting with for a moment, because it shows something important about how these patterns actually take hold. It's rarely one dramatic rule being imposed all at once. It's 1,000 tiny adjustments a person makes on their own, quietly, until narrating their whereabouts stops feeling like a response to pressure and starts feeling like their own idea, their own habit, their own personality. By the time Rachel's friend pointed it out, the behavior no longer felt like something Tyler required. It felt like something Rachel simply did. 6 months before this post, something happened that Rachel describes as the first real crack in how safe this all felt. Her location briefly glitched, some kind of app error, the kind of thing that happens occasionally with any tracking app, and it showed her at a place she hadn't actually been to. Tyler called her 4 times in 10 minutes. When she finally answered, he wasn't calm anymore. He sounded panicked, almost angry, demanding to know why she'd lied about where she was. Rachel hadn't gone anywhere near that location. It took her pulling up her actual bank transaction from the coffee shop she genuinely was sitting in, time-stamped, receipt in hand, essentially presenting evidence to her own partner. Just to calm him down, this is the moment Rachel identifies as the first time she felt truly unsettled, rather than comforted, by the fact that Tyler had access to her location at all. Because in that moment, the location sharing hadn't protected her. It had put her on trial, based on a technical glitch, with the burden of proof resting entirely on her. It's worth pausing on how quickly the dynamic flipped in that moment. The entire premise of location sharing had always been framed around Rachel's safety, knowing where she was meant Tyler could rest easy, could stop worrying. But in the one moment that actually tested that premise, the app didn't produce reassurance. It produced an interrogation. Rachel wasn't comforted by being found. She was forced to defend herself against being found somewhere she'd never actually gone. That inversion, safety becoming suspicion within the span of a single phone call, is often the clearest signal that a supposed safety measure has already curdled into something else. After that experience, Rachel tried to bring up turning the whole thing off, going back to something simpler, just trusting each other, the way people did before an app could tell you exactly where your partner was standing at any given moment. Tyler went quiet. Then he said something Rachel says she still thinks about constantly. "If you turn it off, I'll know you're hiding something." Sit with that sentence for a moment, because it's doing something very specific, very quietly. It doesn't accuse Rachel of anything directly. It simply redefines the entire concept of privacy itself as evidence of guilt. Turning off a tracking app, an entirely reasonable, normal boundary in any relationship, gets reframed as proof that something is being concealed. Once that logic takes hold, there's no way to ever have privacy again without it being treated as suspicious. The trap closes quietly, without ever needing to be enforced through anger. What makes this particular kind of sentence so effective, and so hard to argue against in the moment, is that it doesn't sound unreasonable on its face. It sounds almost logical, the way a lot of controlling reasoning does, when it's delivered calmly rather than shouted. There's no visible threat, no raised voice, nothing that would clearly register as a red flag if you described it to a stranger without context. It's only when you step back and notice what the sentence actually accomplishes, permanently closing off the option of privacy, that its real function becomes visible. Rachel didn't turn it off. She was scared of what it would mean if she did, scared of the fight it would start, scared of Tyler assuming the worst about her simply for wanting something as basic as normal privacy. Looking back now, she recognizes that fear itself should have told her everything she needed to know. The breaking point came 2 months before this post. Rachel went to visit her mother in the hospital. It was a minor procedure, nothing life-threatening, but Rachel was stressed, and she just wanted to be present with her mom without narrating every single movement to someone else. She put her phone on silent and didn't check it for about 3 hours while she sat beside her mother's bed. When she finally looked at her phone, she had 14 texts and 6 missed calls from Tyler. The messages had escalated over those 3 hours, starting with a fairly normal "Hey, saw you're at the hospital. Everything okay?" and ending by the final messages with "This is exactly what people do when they're hiding something. I need you to call me right now." Rachel called him from the hospital hallway, completely exhausted, and tried to explain that her mom was having a procedure and she simply wanted to be present for her. Tyler didn't apologize. Instead, he told her she should have told him where she was going, so he wouldn't have to worry. Rachel pointed out, reasonably, that he could literally see exactly where she was the entire time. That was the whole point of the app in the first place. And Tyler's response was the moment everything finally became clear to her. He said, "Seeing where you are isn't the same as knowing you're safe. You could have told me what was happening." It's worth imagining that exact scene for a moment. A hospital hallway, fluorescent lighting, the particular exhaustion of having just sat with a parent through a medical procedure, and instead of a partner offering comfort, a phone call demanding an explanation for silence that was never actually unaccounted for in the first place. The app had done exactly what it was designed to do the entire time. It had shown Tyler precisely where Rachel was, every minute of those 3 hours. And still, somehow, that wasn't enough. That's when it hit her. The location sharing was never actually about safety. It never had been. It was about control, wearing the costume of concern. Knowing Rachel's exact location gave Tyler a dot on a map, but it never gave him peace of mind, because no amount of information was ever actually going to be enough. His anxiety was never really about Rachel's whereabouts. It was something inside him that a blue dot on a screen was never capable of fixing, no matter how much access he was given. This realization is worth sitting with, because it names something that applies far beyond location sharing apps specifically. Anxiety rooted in past betrayal often can't actually be soothed by external information, no matter how much of it is provided. A partner who needs constant proof of safety isn't ultimately looking for data. They're looking for a feeling of security that data alone was never designed to provide. every reassurance simply becomes the new baseline, and the anxiety resets, demanding the next piece of proof. Rachel could have shared her exact GPS coordinates down to the inch, and it still wouldn't have addressed the actual wound driving Tyler's behavior, because that wound had nothing to do with information in the first place. They broke up 3 weeks before this post. Rachel says Tyler, as far as she knows, still doesn't fully understand why. He keeps repeating, "I just wanted to know you were safe." And in some strange way, Rachel believes he genuinely thinks that's true. But safety was never really the outcome of any of this. What Rachel actually felt, every single day, by the end, was watched. Since the breakup, Rachel deleted the app entirely. She says she didn't realize how much lighter she'd feel just existing without narrating her whereabouts to anyone. Last week, she stopped somewhere completely random, just because she wanted to, with no explanation owed to a single person, and she actually started crying in her car afterward, which surprised even her. She hadn't realized how much tension she'd been quietly carrying, until the moment it finally lifted. That image sitting alone in a parked car, crying not from grief but from sheer, unfamiliar relief captures something important about what long-term surveillance actually costs a person, even when it never escalates into anything more visibly dramatic. The toll isn't always obvious while you're inside it. It tends to reveal itself only in the absence, in the sudden, almost disorienting lightness of no longer needing to account for yourself. Many people who leave controlling dynamics describe a similar delayed reaction, a kind of grief for how much energy they didn't even realize they'd been spending every single day, just to stay ahead of a question that hadn't even been asked yet. Rachel is careful to clarify something important in her post. She's not saying location sharing is inherently evil for every couple. She's seen it work perfectly fine for other people, in other relationships, built on a different foundation entirely. What she's asking, instead, is for people to honestly interrogate the feeling underneath the habit. Is this making me feel safe? Or is it making me feel surveilled? Because, for her, by the end, those two feelings had become completely indistinguishable until the moment she was finally free of the app, and could suddenly feel the difference again. She adds one more clarifying note, worth mentioning directly, because it matters for how this story should be understood. Tyler never hit her. There was no physical abuse involved in this relationship. What happened instead was slower, quieter, a gradual erosion of privacy that never looked dramatic enough, in any single moment, to clearly name for what it actually was, until the pattern had fully taken shape. This clarification matters for a specific reason. Stories about controlling behavior often get dismissed by people who assume that without physical violence or explicit threats, nothing truly harmful actually happened. Rachel's story pushes back directly against that assumption. Control doesn't require force to be real. It doesn't require cruelty to be damaging. Sometimes it simply requires patience, consistency, and the quiet reframing of privacy as suspicion, repeated often enough, for long enough, that a person stops noticing where their own boundaries used to be. When Rachel shared this story, the reaction from readers revealed just how many people recognize this exact pattern in their own relationships, often without ever having examined it closely before. One of the most widely shared reactions focused on Tyler's own words, "Knowing where you are isn't the same as knowing you're safe." Readers describe this line as genuinely chilling once you actually sit with it, because it reveals that the entire arrangement was never really about location data in the first place. It was about needing a level of constant reassurance that no amount of information could ever fully satisfy. Many commenters were particularly struck by the bank statement moment, the idea of having to prove where you were, receipts in hand, to your own partner, simply because of an app glitch. People who hadn't experienced this kind of dynamic firsthand said it was hard to fully grasp just how exhausting that specific kind of scrutiny becomes over time, while people who had experienced something similar said it was painfully, immediately familiar. There was also strong reaction to Tyler's line about turning the app off. "If you turn it off, I'll know you're hiding something." Several people described this as manipulation dressed up as logic, precisely because it strips away any possibility of having privacy again without that privacy being read as guilt. That's not trust. That's a trap disguised as a reasonable concern. The hospital scene drew some of the strongest emotional reactions. Sitting beside your own mother during a medical procedure, and still being guilt-tripped hours later for not narrating your location in real time, struck many readers as proof that this was never actually about Rachel's safety at all. It was about Tyler's fear of losing control over information, regardless of what was actually happening in Rachel's life at that moment. Several commenters focused on how slowly this entire pattern escalated, noting that this gradual nature is exactly what allows dynamics like this to survive for so long. No single moment, on its own, ever looked dramatic enough to clearly call out, It was only in hindsight, looking at the full shape of 2 years, that the pattern became undeniable. Some readers brought a slightly more sympathetic lens to Tyler's underlying fear, pointing out that his previous relationship had ended due to infidelity, which likely explains where some of this anxiety originally came from. But nearly everyone agreed on one key distinction: that explanation for the fear doesn't make it Rachel's responsibility to fix through constant surveillance. Past pain can explain a behavior without excusing the impact that behavior has on someone else who did nothing to deserve that level of monitoring. One particularly insightful reaction focused on the detail of Rachel explaining herself before Tyler even asked. Several people identified this as the clearest sign that the pattern had become fully internalized, no longer simply a rule imposed from outside, but a fear Rachel had started carrying entirely on her own, quietly, without anyone even needing to enforce it anymore. And a number of readers admitted this story made them want to pause and genuinely reflect on their own relationships. People who currently share locations with their own partners, and who had always assumed it felt perfectly fine, found themselves asking a harder question after reading this: whether it truly still felt fine, or whether they'd simply grown used to something they'd never fully examined. A few readers raised an interesting counterpoint worth including, pointing out that location sharing itself works perfectly well for many couples, including some who described using it purely for practical convenience, coordinating pickup times, checking in during long solo drives, or simply as a small comfort during travel. These readers were careful to distinguish between location sharing used as a mutual, low-stakes convenience, and location sharing used as an emotional regulation tool for one partner's unresolved anxiety, arguing that the technology itself was neutral, and the real issue was always the underlying relationship dynamic it got layered onto. Another commenter offered a slightly different lens, suggesting that the real turning point in Rachel's story wasn't the location sharing at all, but the specific moment Tyler reframed her privacy request as evidence of guilt. According to this reading, nearly any boundary, turning off notifications, wanting a night alone, declining to explain a plan in advance, could have triggered the same underlying dynamic, because the location app was simply the vehicle his insecurity happened to attach itself to, not the root cause itself. Let's step back from Rachel and Tyler's specific situation and consider what this story reveals more broadly, because the deeper lesson here extends well beyond location sharing apps specifically. Convenience and control can look identical from the outside, especially in the early stages. When Tyler first asked Rachel to share her location, it was framed entirely around emotional closeness and security. And in isolation, that framing wasn't unreasonable. Plenty of healthy couples do share locations by genuine mutual choice, without it ever curdling into something else. What made Rachel's situation different wasn't the app itself. It was what the app was quietly being used for underneath the surface explanation. Small compromises rarely feel dangerous in the moment they're made. Agreeing to share a location one time doesn't feel like agreeing to a lifestyle of constant justification. But patterns like this rarely announce their true shape up front. They reveal themselves slowly, compromise by compromise, until a person looks back and realizes how much ground they've quietly given away, one reasonable sounding request at a time. This is precisely why it's worth periodically revisiting agreements made early in a relationship, even ones that felt completely fine at the time. What functioned as a reasonable compromise in month 4 doesn't automatically remain reasonable by year 2, especially if the surrounding relationship dynamics have shifted in ways that weren't obvious in the moment. Checking in with yourself honestly, every so often, about whether an old agreement still genuinely feels okay, is a much healthier habit than simply assuming that because something was agreed to once, it should remain unquestioned indefinitely. The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," deserves serious scrutiny wherever it appears. This exact logic can justify almost any invasive practice, in any context, precisely because it reframes privacy itself as evidence of wrongdoing. Wanting basic privacy has never actually meant having something shameful to conceal. Genuine trust doesn't require constant access to every detail of a partner's movements in order to feel secure. Self-monitoring is one of the clearest signs a boundary has already quietly dissolved. The moment Rachel began explaining her whereabouts before being asked, the external rule had already become an internal reflex. This kind of anticipatory self-justification is often a more reliable warning sign than any single argument or confrontation, precisely because it shows the fear has moved from being imposed to being fully absorbed. This distinction matters because it changes what recovery actually requires. If the problem were simply an external rule, removing the rule would be enough. But when the behavior has become internalized, as it had for Rachel, simply deleting an app doesn't automatically undo the reflex underneath it. That's part of why Rachel's relief after the breakup felt so unexpectedly large. She wasn't just free of Tyler's expectations. She was slowly relearning what it felt like to move through her day without a constant, quiet audience running in the back of her mind. Genuine safety and constant surveillance produce very different feelings. Even when they can initially look similar from the outside, real safety tends to feel like relief, like being able to relax. What Rachel experienced, by contrast, was a persistent, low-grade tension, the sense of always being slightly on alert, always ready to explain herself, never quite able to simply exist without accounting for her own movements to someone else. Explaining someone's controlling behavior doesn't require excusing its impact. Tyler's fear likely originated from a real and painful betrayal in his past. That context matters for understanding where the behavior came from. But understanding the root of a fear is not the same as accepting responsibility for managing that fear on someone else's behalf, especially when doing so requires surrendering your own basic privacy and autonomy in the process. There's also something worth saying about how Rachel finally recognized this pattern, and how she can carry that recognition forward into future relationships. The clarity didn't arrive during a single dramatic fight. It arrived cumulatively, built from a series of smaller moments: the bank statement, the hospital hallway, the reflexive texting, until the full pattern became impossible to keep excusing individually. Real recognition of a toxic dynamic often works this way. It's rarely one single red flag. It's the slow accumulation of many small ones, each easy to dismiss on its own, until they're finally viewed together as a complete picture. There's a related point worth making about why it took Rachel as long as it did to see this clearly. Each individual incident, taken alone, had a plausible, sympathetic explanation. The glitch really was just a glitch. Tyler's fear of infidelity really did stem from a real past betrayal. The hospital messages really could be read as simple worry from someone who cared. It's precisely this plausibility, this reasonable-sounding explanation available for every single incident, that makes patterns like this so difficult to name in real time. Nobody hands you an obvious villain to point to. Instead, you're left holding a collection of individually forgivable moments that, only when placed side by side, reveal something far less forgivable as a whole. Moving forward, Rachel's experience offers a useful framework for anyone currently navigating a similar dynamic in their own relationship, or wondering whether a habit that's always felt normal might actually be something else entirely. It's worth honestly asking whether location sharing, or any similar practice, was something both partners genuinely wanted, or something one partner requested out of insecurity that the other partner simply absorbed to keep the peace. The origin of a habit often reveals more about its true function than the habit itself. It's also worth paying attention to how a partner reacts specifically to any request for privacy, rather than only to the location sharing habit itself. A partner who can hear, "Let's turn this off," without treating it as an accusation is behaving very differently than a partner who immediately reframes that request as evidence of guilt. Physical safety isn't the only thing worth protecting in a relationship. Emotional and psychological safety matter just as much. And constant monitoring, even when it's framed protectively, can quietly erode a person's sense of autonomy long before it ever produces an openly hostile confrontation. It's also worth recognizing that autonomy within a relationship isn't a luxury reserved for people without commitment to their partner. Being fully committed to someone and needing to exist, occasionally, without being tracked, explained, or accounted for, are not contradictory things. A healthy relationship generally allows both togetherness and independence to coexist, without either partner needing to sacrifice one entirely to prove the other. And finally, it's worth remembering that leaving a relationship like this doesn't require a single, dramatic, unmistakable moment of proof. Sometimes the clearest evidence is simply how much lighter a person feels once the pattern is finally gone, the way Rachel described crying in her car. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, unfamiliar relief of finally existing without needing to explain herself to anyone. What makes this story worth sitting with is that nothing about it looks dramatic from the outside. There was no single explosive fight, no dramatic betrayal, no cruelty in the traditional sense, just a slow, quiet erosion of privacy, dressed up the entire time in the language of love and concern. It raises a question worth asking honestly about your own relationships, whatever they look like. Is a habit like this making you feel genuinely safe, or is it simply making you feel watched, in a way you've slowly stopped noticing because you've grown so used to it? This question doesn't have a universal answer that applies to every couple in every circumstance, and Rachel herself is careful not to claim it does. But the value of asking it honestly, periodically, rather than simply assuming a habit is fine because it's always been there, is exactly the kind of quiet self-check that patterns like this one depend on people never actually doing. If this story resonated with you, whether you recognize yourself in Rachel, or in Tyler, or simply in the underlying pattern itself, let us know in the comments. This is clearly a topic more people are quietly navigating than most would openly admit. Maybe you've been the one explaining your whereabouts before anyone even asks. Maybe you've been the one needing that constant reassurance, without fully understanding why no amount of information ever seemed to be enough. Or maybe, like so many people reading this story, you're only now pausing to genuinely examine a habit you'd always assumed was simply normal. Wherever you find yourself, the most valuable thing you can do is ask the question honestly, the same way Rachel eventually did. There's no shame in recognizing yourself on either side of this story. Most people don't enter a relationship intending to either surveil or be surveilled. These patterns tend to grow out of genuine fear, genuine care, genuine attempts to feel secure with someone you love. They simply take a wrong turn somewhere along the way, often so gradually that neither person notices, until they're already standing somewhere neither of them meant to end up. If this video made you think, give it a like, and subscribe for more real stories like this one every week. And if something in this story felt uncomfortably familiar, know that noticing it is genuinely the first step toward understanding it clearly. Even if that recognition, like Rachel's, arrives later than you might have wished, that recognition alone doesn't have to mean the end of a relationship either. Some couples, once a pattern like this is named clearly and honestly, are able to rebuild something healthier together, with real boundaries and real accountability on both sides. Others, like Rachel and Tyler, find that the pattern had already gone too far to fully unwind. Either outcome starts the same way, with one person finally deciding to stop excusing what they've been quietly living with, and asking, out loud, whether it was ever really about safety at all. See you in the next video. Until then, remember that real trust was never meant to require a map. Sometimes the clearest sign of safety isn't knowing exactly where someone is, it's simply knowing, without needing proof, that they'll always choose to come back. And if you're currently the one asking for that kind of constant access from a partner, out of a fear you recognize but haven't fully addressed, consider that the healing you're actually looking for probably isn't going to arrive through a location pin. It's going to arrive through the harder, slower work of examining where that fear originally came from, ideally with the support of a therapist, rather than asking someone else to carry the weight of resolving it for you, one check-in at a time.